I told you that time is actually a tool used to measure the movement of light from point A to point B? A lot of people refer to time as an illusion, and that's true. It does hold validity within the confines of the matrix, within the confines and the limitations of the physical world that we experience on the day-to-day. But outside of those confines, outside of this matrix, time does not fundamentally exist. In other words, the past, the present, and the future don't actually exist as separate periods of time. Now, why does knowing this and how does knowing this actually help us in our day-to-day? In this episode of Forming the Formless, episode 9, all about the illusion of time, I'm going to help us all remember how time can actually be used productively as the tool that it is within the matrix, while also helping us remember and becoming aware of the fact that it doesn't exist outside of this physical matrix, of this physical world. And when we know that, when we remember that, the way that we live, the way that we experience our day-to-day lives change completely. Because we will no longer be bound by what we call the limitations of time and space. Because we understand that we come from a fundamental universe that doesn't even include that illusion to begin with. Now remember, time is valid within this world, within this matrix. But understanding how the fundamental universe works in relation to time will help us become masters of it, as opposed to slaves to it. My name is Jason Shurka, and this is Forming the Formless, accessing and elevating your spirit and soul. Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of Forming the Formless. This is episode 9, all about the illusion of time. Now this is the second of the 3 illusions that I will be covering in this series. The first illusion, which was in the last episode, was all about the illusion of separation. And by the way, the illusion of separation and the illusion of time go hand in hand. When you can transcend and see through the illusion of separation, understanding the illusion of time becomes a whole lot easier, and I will explain why and how throughout this episode. The next illusion, which is also the last episode of this series, is going to be all about the illusion of death, which is a whole animal in and of itself. It's very interesting when we go into the real meaning of what that truly means, as opposed to just saying death is an illusion. Well, how, why, and what does that mean for us in our day-to-day? But I'm going to be covering that in the next episode, the last episode of this series, all about the illusion of death. So for this episode, we're going to be focusing on the illusion of time. Remember, when it comes to illusions, because something is an illusion does not mean that that something is bad. It just means that we have to understand that it's an illusion. And when I say illusion, I mean it holds validity within the confines of this physical matrix, of our experience on the day-to-day, but outside of the confines and the limitations of this physical matrix, which, by the way, is a very, very small sliver of a fraction of what's truly going on in this infinite universe. We have to remember that these illusions are illusions because they do not exist in the fundamental reality. And remember, the most important thing here is to guide with the awareness of the fundamental reality, and then to have everything else within the physical reality, these illusions, be your tools to help you live and really master the matrix. That's the purpose of transcending and seeing through the illusion of time. So to start this episode, I actually want to read a quote to you guys from Alan Watts. It's one of my favorite quotes out there about the illusion of time, the illusion of the past, the illusion of the future. And then I'm going to read an opening passage on page 135 from Forming the Formless to really set the precedent of this episode as a whole, because this is a very important one that can change the way that we see everything. So the quote by Alan Watts goes as follows: "I have realized that the past and the future are the real illusions, that they exist in the present moment, which is what there is and all there is." A quote by Alan Watts. And the opening passage of this book, which is going to set the precedent for the rest of this episode, says the following: "When thinking about the idea of time, most of us tend to think in terms of beginning and end, or birth and death, because of the ego's need to separate the inseparable." Remember, this also ties in to the illusion of separation, and one of the main foundations all about understanding the ego. So this is how everything is starting to tie together. "We believe that time moves in a one-way flow from the past to the present and into the future. We believe that what happens now and what will happen in the future are always a result of what happened in the past. That is not true. I will explain through this episode. This is an illusion. Time is an illusion. We have been taught that time is something real. We have been taught that we live along some intangible and invisible timeline between birth and death. Also something that we've given labels to, which I'll explain shortly, but just to give a little preface of the importance of labels like birth and death, the only reason why time can exist is because there is somewhere to travel between point A and point B. When you dissolve those points, which are the result of definitions that we arbitrarily gave to certain points in our lives for practical purposes, that's why time can exist, because we say from here to there. Without that, time and space becomes irrelevant in the fundamental universe because those points don't exist in the fundamental universe. Most of all, we have been taught that we must spend this time wisely, or we are so-called wasting our time. Time was created by us, by human beings. The clock, the calendar, these are all imperfect tools that were created to indicate our positions relative to other things as well as other people. Now we're going into relativity because time is relative. We'll talk about that in just a moment as well. It can be very helpful for practical purposes, such as allowing us to arrange events, make a train, schedule meetings, celebrate birthdays, and so on. The problem is that we have become slaves to it. We have forgotten its true cause of creation and now live by the illusion that it actually exists. This misconception has turned the tables, and time now controls us. This is a reflection of us being slaves to the matrix, as opposed to masters of it. Once you understand the illusion of time, you will be able to use it instead of letting it use you. You will no longer be stuck in the past or worried about the future. You will live in the only place that truly exists, which is the now moment, the present moment. Now, I know a lot of you have heard about this from books like The Power of Now, because this is becoming more and more relevant. But just to break it down, to make it really simple. The past existed in your present moment. The future will exist in your present moment. And in that way, it's not the past that dictates your present. It's actually your present that dictates what you call your past, because it's all happening in the same moment when it happens. Now again, does this mean that we just start becoming these Buddhas that say, oh no, past is an illusion, future is an illusion, I'm going to be in the now all the time? Well, philosophically, yes, but in practicality, we still use words to explain what happened yesterday and what might happen tomorrow. So, not for a second am I telling you, let's stop doing that. What I'm saying is, let's stop believing that that's the ultimate truth. Meaning, we can use the illusion of time as the tool that it was intended to be. Meaning, a tool to explain things within the matrix for practical purposes, while still having our balance and understanding that it's simply a tool. It's not part of the fundamental universe, and that's the balance. You see, on one side, if we're just physical, and we believe that time is real and not an illusion, it's detrimental to our growth and to our spiritual evolution. On the other side of the spectrum, if we say time is an illusion, it holds no value, well, that's also detrimental to our growth and our spiritual evolution. The idea over here is not to get rid of the matrix. We live in it. It's to master it. It's to understand how do we use the tool of time in a way that we are the masters of it, again, as I said earlier, as opposed to being slaves to it. So I want to read you another passage on page 138 called The Relative Reality, speaking about Albert Einstein's theory of special relativity, because it speaks about something very interesting, proven, scientifically proven. It's now the accepted narrative when it comes to understanding time as a relative reality as opposed to an absolute reality. So it says the following: Albert Einstein revolutionized physics and astronomy after publishing his theory of special relativity in 1905. He challenged Sir Isaac Newton's accepted view that time is absolute and forward-moving, and concluded that time is actually relative and can both stretch and contract. More than that, Einstein concluded that time is relative to your position and speed on Earth, and deduced that the faster you move through space, the slower you move through time. Einstein's theory of special relativity proves that time is indeed a relative reality and not a fundamental reality. And before I move on by reading an analogy about a railroad track around the world to show you how time is relative, I want to go back about 2 sentences to emphasize something that was said. Einstein concluded that time is relative to your position and speed on Earth, and he deduced that the faster you move through space, the slower you move through time. Now, what does that tell us about time, beyond the fact that time is relative? Time is a tool used to measure the movement of light from point A to point B. Light has a speed called the speed of light. Depending on what metric system you use, it's either 186,000 miles per second or 300,000 kilometers per second. They're both the same, using different units and different metrics. The point is, it's very, very fast. But again, it says, the faster you move through space, the slower you move through time. Why? Because time starts to slow down when you're starting to get closer to matching the speed of light. Because the speed of light is how we measure time. And that's very important to understand what time truly is. You see, when we think about time, we think about a clock. 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, and so on and so forth. What we could be and should be thinking about when it comes to what time truly is understanding that it is a tool, I'm going to repeat it over and over again, it is a tool used to measure the movement of light from point A to point B. That's all it is. And that movement of light is reality, is existence. But when we're in the matrix, we need a way to measure that, because we need to live according to things that we can measure. Labels, identifications, points in time, time zones, all of those things. So again, time was a tool created for practical purposes. And as I said in the beginning, because we forgot that, we're now at a point where time has taken over us. We believe it to be true instead of using it as a tool in the way that it was intended to be used. So I'm going to read you all an analogy, also starting on page 138 and moving forward, all about a railroad track analogy that I put together when I was writing this book. And it's very, very powerful because it gives us a very simple way of understanding that time is relative. I want you to imagine a railroad track that wraps around the entire circumference of the Earth. The train on the tracks wraps around the entire track with no beginning or end. So it's a circle, an ongoing circle. No start, no end. That's very important. I'll explain why in a second. You hop on board the train at the New York City stop and begin your journey around the world. There are 20 stops along the way, including cities, forests, islands, and oceans. The first stop after New York City is Los Angeles in California. You are currently on the train approaching the city, however, you are not quite there yet. In this moment, you perceive Los Angeles as being something that you are going to see relative to where you are in the future. You finally arrive in Los Angeles and experience it in what you call your present moment. After a few hours of touring the city, you board the train and continue on the journey. Los Angeles is now behind you. It is now in what you perceive as what we call your past. The next stop is Hawaii. Once again, you perceive Hawaii in your future until you arrive on the magnificent island of Hawaii. After you leave the island, it falls back into your past and the cycle continues. Now, before you arrived in both Los Angeles and Hawaii, did they exist? Of course. Once you reached each destination, did they exist? Of course. After you left each destination, did they exist? Of course. You only perceive each destination in the future before you arrive, and in the past after you leave, based on your physical position on the train track relative to each destination. However, the fact is, no matter what your position is on the train track, all train stops exist simultaneously. Whether it is in what you perceive as your future or past, in other words, New York City, Los Angeles, Hawaii, they all exist in the same moment, although they are in different time zones for practical purposes, with sunrise and sunset, and is it nighttime or daytime? Are you sleeping? Are you awake? Again, all those things exist within the matrix, and that's why we need those tools to live within the matrix in a seamless and effortless way. But we must remember that all these stops exist simultaneously. Now here's something interesting. We experience time as a linear and forward-moving passage. But why? That's how we experience it within the matrix. And there are two very simple reasons as to why that's how we experience it in the matrix. Reason number one is because of something that I like to call fixed point consciousness. Fixed point consciousness is pretty much the way that we're hardwired in this physical body to see things. So because we live in the physical world, we like identifying points. We say, this is the beginning, this is the end. This is where the ego comes in, by the way. And again, back to what we said in one of the first episodes about the foundations, the second foundation of understanding how the ego works. The ego is not a bad thing. The question is do you understand the world beyond the limitations of the ego? And if you do, then you can align the awareness and the desire of the ego with the awareness and the desire of the soul, and that's when the ego becomes your servant. So what is fixed point consciousness? It's our urge, our desire, the way we are hardwired to look at certain points, to identify certain things, to be able to have practical conversations and communicate, physically speaking. Fixed point consciousness is our way that we're created, meaning created in this physical world. I am Jason. I am sitting in my apartment right now. Now we know that in a different world, on a higher realm, in a different dimension, that is not the fundamental truth. The fundamental truth has to do with energy and infinite planes coexisting, which goes into quantum physics and very deep realms that will take you down a whole other rabbit hole. But in this physical realm, within this physical matrix, I am right here, right now. And yesterday was yesterday, and tomorrow will be tomorrow. And as I walk down the street, I walk 1 block, and 2 blocks, and 3 blocks. But what are those blocks relative to? I can only walk 1 block relative to a starting point that I identified. Now we move into the identification of different points. Again, we like calling things beginning, end, birth, death, from here to there, point A, point B. Why? Because in this physical world, we need to identify points in order to live practically. So 1 point could be yesterday. Another point could be tomorrow. 1 point could be 21st Street. Another point could be 24th Street. Whatever it may be, these points, these definitions, these labels, these identifications are what allow us to live in practicality within this physical matrix. But the fact of the matter is those points are something that we made up. That's something we must remember if we want to truly understand and remember that time is an illusion that does not exist fundamentally. So I want to read you another passage on page 146 called the Grand Fallacy. It's a grand fallacy in and of itself, which is used for practical purposes, but must be seen through. So we understand the difference between the fundamental universe and the matrix that we live in. So on page 146, the Grand Fallacy says the following. Time only becomes real when we perceive there to be separate points of reference to travel between. Time becomes even more real when we perceive these points of reference as physical events, such as when you were born, when you purchased your first car, the day you got married, and the day you died, to name a few. There are no separate events. The question that must be answered first is, what is an event? Let's go back to the train track analogy. There are 20 different destinations. Each destination is in a different state, a different country, and so on. But what actually separates California and its surrounding states? Borders. And who created those borders? We did. They are simply lines that were agreed upon to separate one state from another. The truth is, there is no true separation between California and New York other than that which we created. They are part of the same land. They are one. This book poses another example. Where does this book, Forming the Formless, begin? The front cover, the introduction, the acknowledgments, chapter 1, all of these are valid beginning points. However, it is our agreed upon definition that creates what we call the beginning. This leads to an endless cycle that teaches us that both beginning and end is based on what we collectively agree as the definition of a beginning and end. We must always remember that we created these definitions. They are not real. When something begins or ends is all a matter of definition, definitions that we've created. Our agreement upon each definition is what gives each beginning and end validity. The fact is, there is no beginning and there is no end. Therefore, there are no points of reference for time to travel between. So now what does that mean? Let's go back to the train track analogy. All these 20 different points. Time can only exist because we say point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4, point 5, and so on. So there's something to travel between. But now let me challenge you just a little bit. Let's say that instead of experiencing your life and your journey from on the train track, you took a rocket, went into space, and looked at Earth as a whole. California, New York, Hawaii, all those places are all in your scope. You can literally see them all at the same time. So when you were on the train with your fixed point consciousness, the way that we live our lives today, what happens is we identify points and we say past, present, future. But when you zoom out to the fundamental reality, the question comes up and the answer is apparent. All these stops exist at the same time. And if we take away those points, all you see is an ongoing flow of infinity. It never started, it never ends, and there's no points to travel between because everything is happening simultaneously. Now, when everything is happening simultaneously, that gives us the ability to do many different things when it comes to the way that we manifest things in our lives. The past happened in the present happens in the present, the future happens in the present. It all happens in the same time. And the more we begin to embody that truth, the less sadness we will have over the past and the less anxiety we will have over the future. And by the way, this is a message for all of us, including myself. I'm just the medium that it's flowing through. But this is a message for each and every one of us, no matter how evolved you are, or no matter how primitive you may be. And if there's one thing that I learned, the more you call yourself primitive in that form of humility, and not just calling yourself primitive, but the more primitive you think you are, the more advanced you probably really are. And when you sit there and you say, I know it all and this is what it is, that's probably the indication that we got to take a step back, and maybe you don't. The truth is, none of us know it all. And we're all soldiers, and we're all pieces of the same source that are helping each and every one of us remember the truth of where we came from. Now, I really want to emphasize the importance of practicality. Practicality is very important when living within the matrix, because we still have to be practical when it comes to using time. So again, just like I said in the beginning of this episode, just because time is an illusion does not mean it's bad. Just because separation is an illusion does not mean it doesn't hold validity in this physical realm, in this physical matrix. We have to remain practical. So continue using your watch. Continue being on time for meetings. Continue making your train for work. Continue celebrating your birthdays, because we have to really honor, embrace, and celebrate our humanness within this physical body and the experience that comes with. All I'm saying is, always remember the fundamental truths of the fundamental universe. Because if we can do that, and I've said this multiple times and I'm going to keep repeating it, we turn and we evolve from slaves to the matrix into masters of the matrix. The last passage that I want to read you all from Forming the Formless is called The Illusion of Memory, on page 151, because some people may be asking at this point, how can time be an illusion if I remember yesterday? And this is a valid question with a simple answer. Now again, now is all that exists. Now encompasses all past, present, and future in one continuous and ever-present moment. You simply experienced yesterday as a different day because you as a human being experience reality from a fixed point within the eternal cycle of the universe. So from this fixed point of experience, of course time exists. However, it is simply a relative reality and not a fundamental truth. In other words, it's an illusion and not a foundation. It is always important to remember that if we were to zoom out of the fixed point by which we experience our reality, we would see the eternal cycle of the universe where all past, present, and future exist simultaneously in one moment, the present moment, the now. So the illusion of memory says the following. Memory provides us with the ability to perceive time as a linear and forward-moving passage. It creates the illusion that time flows from the past to the present and into the future. The truth is, if there was no memory, there would be no time. Our memory of the past tells us what we have done, and we therefore define who we are through it. You may need factual memory for practical purposes, such as remembering your name, but this is not what we use memory for anymore. Many of us use memory to recollect what we see as events that happened in the past. When these events are perceived as negative events, and this is very important, this is where major damage and stagnation occurs. Doing so holds you to the past, in this case an unproductive and self-destructive past. If you insist on defining yourself by your past, that is your choice, but this is all an illusion. The fact is that it all starts now. Let go of the poisonous habit of thought where you define yourself as a result of what you've done. Instead, adapt the healthier habit of thought where you define yourself based on what you are doing in this present moment. After all, right now is the only moment of time that actually exists, which dissolves all time because the present moment is the only thing there is. Doing so will liberate you from the illusion of time and unproductive memory. This is what I like to call true freedom. So what did we learn in this episode as a whole? To sum it up, big picture. Time is an illusion. Time is actually a tool that can be very productive within this experience of the physical matrix, of our physical experience as human beings in our day-to-day lives. A tool used to live within the matrix in a practical way. Schedule meetings, make trains, celebrate birthdays, celebrate your humanness, celebrate the new year. but all while still understanding that it is simply a tool and not the fundamental reality. And to sum this all up in the most important sentence there is, in my opinion, from my perspective, that I've said multiple times throughout this episode already. When you can see through the illusion of time, when you can transcend the illusion of time and use it as the tool that it was intended to be used as, you evolve from a slave to the matrix as a master of the matrix. And that's what seeing through the illusion of time really does. In the next episode of Forming the Formless, episode 10, also the last episode, we're going to be speaking all about the illusion of death, transcending this concept that really is just another word representing the transformation of life, because there is no opposite to life. When we can transcend and see beyond and see through the illusion of death, arbitrary fears that we possess will dissolve. Irrational fears that lead us to do many irrational actions within our day-to-day lives will dissolve. We will move beyond that. We will become masters of our lives as opposed to fearers of the death that doesn't actually exist. My name is Jason Shurka, and this is Forming the Formless. I'll see you all next time, all about the illusion of death. Subscribe. Hey, thanks for watching this video. There's so much more I'd like to dive into, but unfortunately, we can't do that here thanks to the heavy censorship efforts from big tech. If you want to explore this topic further, you can dive deep by accessing our entire uncensored library on unified.tv. There's a link in the description below this video if you want to check it out. A membership to Unified TV gives you unlimited access to hundreds of uncensored podcasts, investigative journalism, documentaries, films, and content that was once available on major streaming platforms like Netflix, but is now banned from the internet. For just $14.99 a month, which is less than $1 a day, you get access to it all. Your subscription also helps keep the platform running free from censorship and corporate influence. Please consider supporting us and enjoy all of our unfiltered and thought-provoking content in return. Thank you very much, and I will see you on Unified TV.